My name is Shaphan Hestick. I am a student at Houghton College, and I am studying political science, international development, and environmental studies. I'm an international student coming from Guyana, and I come from a land where we value the earth itself as something that is sacred. This is something that I grew up with, especially knowing how my parents were deep into gardening, and I often saw my parents covered in dirt at the end of a really long day. There were always farmers and plantations nearby full of rice and sugarcane. There were fruit trees everywhere, jamun and mangoes. Fruit everywhere. Trees that we would climb, friends that would run around barefoot in the villages. This is the Guyana that I knew, where everyone was connected deeply to the earth as creation. When I was about 6 years old, my family, we moved to a place in Guyana called Ramsey Gardens. Ramsey Gardens is evidence of the Dutch culture that is in our colonial past. It has a lot of Hindu influences, and so we were an ethnic minority while we were there. And that land to me is more sacred than most of the other land, specifically because we were positioned in our house 5 minutes walking away from the Atlantic Ocean. A lot of coastal Guyana is right there next to the ocean, and our house was so close. There was just a highway, a seawall, mangrove forest, a strip of beach, and then the Atlantic herself. And as a child, we would interact so often with that landscape. We would get onto our bikes, we would cross the highway, we would go across that seawall, and we would go into the mangrove forest, climb the trees, we would follow the cows around. As cattle herders led their cows through the underbrush of the mangrove forest, we would collect dung as manure for our own private gardens. And I remember so strongly being a part of that kind of community where everyone was so dependent on the earth that it became a part of us. It was something that we all embraced. It was something that we all depended on. Christian, Hindu, Guyanese, all together. And that culture to me was something that was formative in who I am. We moved when I went to high school, further away from the ocean, and it was several years before I returned to Ramsey. And upon returning, I realized that the sacredness of that space had been lost. Once upon a time, the government instituted policies that protected our mangrove forests from deforestation. They understood that cattle rearers weren't always sensitive to the needs of the forest, the need to protect roots of plants. And so they knew that there were people that would go into the forests, chop down trees, build boats, build fences for themselves. And until the government protected that land, it was a free-for-all. Once that law had been established, it was really, really great to see the way that we could balance creation care with our own need to sustain ourselves. When I was 15, we were driving along that highway on our way to somewhere beyond that home village of mine. And I was shocked and disappointed to see that the mangrove forests of my childhood had been cut down. I'm not talking about sparseness. I'm not talking about a slow or steady creep. I'm talking about complete erasure. All of those trees that I had played in, that I had run through as I was gathering manure for my mother and my father's garden, time that I had spent with my siblings in mud, in and among those grasses, on that beach, that entire space was completely devastated and changed. And a part of me felt a loss on that day. But still, it was not a complete and wholesome emotion. I thought to myself, well, that's stupid. Who did that? Whose idea was it to go in there and do that? But I did not have a sense that our country had lost something vital and important. It wasn't until I came to the United States, I came here for college, and I was studying, ironically, environmental science of all things. On one day, I opened my laptop, and I was online, paying attention to the news, trying to find out what I could about what was going on in my home country, and I saw this dramatic image of the ocean surging over the beach, that seawall, that highway, and into the waterways along the coast of my country, into people's homes, into farmlands. Sea level rise for me became real in that moment because I realized that it was a combination of two things. First, the slow and steady creep of the ocean as climate around the world is changing. And second, the apathy of people who understood the sacredness of the land and thinking that as human beings, the world that we're living in is not going to change in a way that can hurt us. And all of a sudden, the land that we had loved our entire lives, the land that I had loved my entire life, was suddenly and dramatically toxified because of our own negligence. I couldn't help but think, what would be different if we had left those trees alone? For me, that moment, that realization, that awakening has led to an incredible journey of self-discovery. I pray deliberately and often, trying to find a way to cry out to God, to encourage Him to move the church to do something about climate action. There is something that needs to be done. People's lives are being affected. And I think to myself, how can we all be so ignorant, even though we are all complicit? And ironically, while I think that to myself, I can't help but recognize that I have so much of that ignorance within myself. I never once thought that it would be helpful or beneficial to do anything about climate change until it was so late for my community at home. Now, through prayer, through education, through literacy and learning, I am dedicated to do whatever I can to make a change. There are so many small things that we can do. There are so many small alternative lifestyles that we can adapt for ourselves as we go forward, trying to take better care of creation. I recognize, because my parents taught me in the garden of my youth, that stewardship is a part of the human responsibility to the earth. And it was given to us because of the faculty that we have to create and to build and to nurture. And it is deeply rooted in my faith. I deeply believe that there is something about the way that I am created that compels me to take care of the world around me. It is my hope that I can return to my country and be part of some restorative process. And so far I've found so many communities, so many people around me in the YECA, at my college, Houghton, that are engaged in working towards creating lasting change, something beautiful that we can continue to enjoy, even as we worship God together. And I can't help but feel, even as I pray, that there is still hope. For us, the evangelical community, for the United States of America and Guyana and the world at large, even as we continue to fall to our knees in humility and in prayer, there is still work that we should do, and there are still gains that can be made.